I want to review Zero Parades for Dead Spies, Zaum's follow-up to the phenomenal midlife crisis CRPG Disco Elysium on its own merits. But unfortunately, there's a bit we have to get out of the way first. If you just want to hear about the game and not the drama, check the timestamps. You might already know how this went down, but here's a brief refresher. Following the release of Disco Elysium, investors took control of Studio Zaum and several of the game's leads were pushed out of the company, with lead writer Robert Kurvitz and lead artist Alexander Rostov alleging that the acquisition was made illegally using money taken from the studio's own funds, money which did not belong to its majority shareholders. These allegations led to a lawsuit which Kurvitz's side eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence. That, of course, does not mean that any party is innocent any more than an allegation means that any party is guilty. A lot of other stuff happened after that. Zaum's new CEO, Ilmar Kompas, alleged that Kurvitz and Rostov were actually let go because of their behavior. Some other people left, a bunch of other people got fired. I need to stress here that this was not a commune which was infiltrated by capitalists. It is a game development and publishing company like any other which was bought out according to the rules that its founders chose to play by. And what happened is unfortunately extremely common in this industry. That does not mean they deserve to lose control of their company, or especially the Disco Elysium IP, but there's been a lot of misunderstanding and hyperbole around this topic, and a lot of hate directed toward the developers still at Zaum, whose major crime was working somewhere and then their boss got fired. I'm generally inclined to side with creatives over investors, and whether Rostov, Kurvitz, and the others were victims of fraud or simply business as usual, I wish they hadn't been fired, and I hope Kurvitz is someday able to regain control of the Disco Elysium IP if nothing else. That said, Zaum remains, and many of the people who worked on Disco Elysium remain at Zaum. They made a new game, and it is very good. The rest is between you and your $40. As for me, I had already planned on buying this game and reviewing it, but I unexpectedly received a free review copy and some printed artwork from Zaum. As always, these came with no stipulations on what I can and can't say about the game, good or bad, outside of the usual embargo stuff about not spoiling the big twists. Zero Parades for Dead Spies begins in the midst of a dissociative episode. We are Hershel Wilk, alias CASCADE, a spy for the Supreme Union of Proletarian Republics, or the Superbloc. 5 years ago, enemies from the techno-fascist state of La Luz discovered our operation and wiped out nearly everyone in our network. As a result, we were pulled out of the field and assigned archival work in some dead-end corner of the Superbloc, our career effectively over. Now we've been unexpectedly called back into the field, to the technically independent city of Portofino, only to find Pseudopod, the man who was to be our partner, unresponsive, catatonic, or maybe even brain-dead, with no clear explanation as to why. We're cast adrift and must struggle to figure out what he was working on before the same trap he stumbled into snares us as well. Zero Parades will, inevitably and intentionally, draw immediate comparisons to Disco Elysium. I have seen other reviewers looking at it only in that light, praising it when it's disco-like and criticizing it where it diverges. I think that's a mistake, but since almost everyone interested in this title is going to be coming from Hershel, we may at least begin with a comparison. Whatever this genre is called, the disco-like, the USSRPG, the 40-years-old simulator, the isometric talk-em-up, we're firmly in it. We manage 3 distinct health bars representing our physical, emotional, and mental state, though here we suffer mounting penalties and eventually the permanent loss of a skill rank should we fail to manage these with caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. It's a more elegant system that rewards exploration and caution, as we're frequently able to reduce these meters through interaction with our environment or successful skill checks, while failing checks makes them go up. We have a large number of skills which act as facets of our personality and take control of the narration. We roll 2d6 to make skill checks, which can be modified by our clothing, status effects, and something very like Disco Elysium's thought cabinet. These systems make up the entirety of the mechanical side of the game. We are not getting into random battles or collecting EXP through mass murder of the local fauna. The visuals, too, will seem quite familiar. If a new studio with new artists had turned this out, I would call it very good but also derivative. But looking back to the artist credits, we see several familiar names like Kaspar Tamsalu, Anton Viel, Duncan Halleck, the list goes on. We're operating in the same visual style because many of these people are the same artists. Still, it's not one-to-one. We see more of Viel's influence breaking out into character art. The world is a little less watercolor and ever so slightly more neon in the rain. I find myself charmed by the differences. Hershel looks like she belongs on a record sleeve. Her inner world isn't Bosch as seen through Harry's delirium tremens. It's a collage of selves, moments in her life fanned out like a hand of cards. Hershel, too, is very different from Harry. She's not an amnesiac or an addict, and perhaps most obviously, but importantly, she's a woman. Women are not allowed to engage in Harry's brand of bombastic mania, We can't say things like, "I want to have fuck with you" to strangers. That is not to say that Harry can do those things without experiencing consequences, but rather that girls are taught from a young age that they must be quieter, less physical, smaller, more deferential, less proud, less bossy, less aggressive than boys. Harry's pain is uncomfortable, but also beautiful and relatable. If a woman behaved the same way, would the same consideration be extended to her? Even if you happen to think so, would she? But Hershel is unwell. Where Harry boils over and acts out, she collapses in on herself or breaks from reality entirely. Her inner voices, much more clearly integrated aspects of herself than Harry's externalized personalities, are constantly clawing at the walls of her mind. A lot of the game's humor comes from the disparity between what the other party must perceive as a normal conversation and Hershel's desperate struggle to appear normal. I found it quite relatable. Disco Elysium can be characterized by rapid swings between tragedy and comedy. Many of the world's NPCs were ridiculous, even cartoonish, with periodic turns to the grim economic reality of Revachol acting as the glue holding the story together. But Zero Parades is written quite differently, partly because our point of view character is less of a clown, but partly out of literary necessity. There are a lot of laugh-out-loud moments in Zero Parades. The phone call with Duchess is a personal favorite, but ultimately the prose takes a less-is-more approach, with fewer gags and tighter editing. This is partly because in terms of narrative, we're working in a different genre. It's a spy story, not a buddy cop murder mystery. There also appear to be more moving parts. I have not yet completed the game, but something I can see about Disco Elysium in hindsight is that a lot of the humor was there to help conceal the fairly simple facts of the murder. They keep the player entertained as they chase down red herrings and dead ends. A more complex story is necessarily going to have less room for that kind of thing. If it wasn't already clear, Zero Parades does not take place on Disco Elysium's world of Mundus. It is its own IP with no story connections to Disco Elysium, but the world it builds does present some similar themes. This is not a world where communism failed. The Superbloc is the largest and most stable superpower in the setting. Nearly a century ago it cemented that power, signing a treaty that ended further aggression with its neighbors and marking what characters in the world call the end of history, a term intended to suggest that this new system of the world would last forever. But forever's a long time, and it's hard for any government to hold on to power after a revolution. As with the Soviet Union, the Superbloc became stodgy and paradoxically conservative over time. It does not appear to have become a totalitarian cult of personality, but Hershel's occasional thoughts about the Inquisition or the seedier sides of the opera's affairs don't paint it in an entirely idealistic light. In some ways, the Superbloc is idealized. In other ways, it seems like the dog who caught the car. The state of the world after history is a sort of Cold War. L'Empire sans territoire, also known as M-Terre or just the Bank, is an extranational entity composed of the forces of capital acting in mutual self-interest, thumbing the scales of trade among nations outside the Superbloc while stymieing its influence outside its borders and infiltrating where it can. La Luz, formerly a sprawling empire, has since collapsed and returned as a fascist nation that is slowly reacquiring its old colonies through a combination of espionage and soft power leverage through copious cultural exports. They make all the best stuff. They have the coolest music, the best TV, and it's all dubbed so that the locals can get into it. Even devoid of any ethos, it acts as propaganda. If the Lusians come here, we could have these nice things all the time. These three forces, communism, liberalism, and fascism, are presented with about the same level of clear-eyed maturity as they were in Disco Elysium. The end of history is a term borrowed from real-life political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who opined after the Cold War ended that history was over, that capital, under the banner of liberalism, armed with nuclear weapons and standing astride the globe, would maintain a degree of stability which would never again be shaken. And then someone invented social media and 9/11. Portofino has entered the developed world at a terrible cost. It originated as a Lusian penal colony. After gaining its freedom, it became a prosperous textile hub, turning out some of the finest silk in the world. Now, globalization has cut Portofino's industries out of the market. The flow of international trade under the guiding hand of M-Terre giving consumers access to cheaper goods made elsewhere and eviscerating domestic industry. There's a common complaint heard around the city, one borrowed from Season 2 of The Wire. We used to make things here. And wherever the forces of global capital have funneled money ever upwards and robbed workers of their future, fascism can worm its way in. The thing about fascism is that it can always afford to make promises of a brighter future, because once it has its boots on your back, it no longer has any reason to keep them. There's been some worry, perhaps justified, that Zaum is no longer motivated by the same idealism that created Disco Elysium, and that it might even harbor some regressive capitalist agenda pushed by its new CEO. I've not fully completed the game, so I will say that it's remotely possible that some 11th hour twist will make it secretly terrible, but as far as I can tell through a dozen or so hours of gameplay, communism, though staid and sometimes sinister, is presented as the only viable alternative to exploitation and extermination in this world. Your other options are to live in a shitty casino where you always lose, or to be forcibly relocated to a camp where they let you watch anime through the concertina wire. Which way, Western man? And that seems to be a question left open for Hershel to decide. The Bureau has not treated her well, and she might have every reason to defect, or to just walk away from the life entirely. If you're looking for an engaging, well-written plot and a mystery with a lot of dark twists and turns, it's here. It's one thing Zero Parades might inarguably do better than Disco Elysium, which was far more focused on Harry's personal journey. If you want another adventure starring a madcap protagonist who is constantly doing legitimately extremely funny things, I'm not sure this is it. Everything in Zero Parades is more understated, for better and for worse. I expect it won't be as popular with streamers for that reason alone. Simply seeing people react to Harry or Kuno being wonderfully ridiculous is great stream fuel. Zero Parades requires a little bit more thoughtful engagement. Maybe that's your thing. Maybe it isn't. If you want another dialogue-driven CRPG with an interesting world and characters to explore, you'll be right at home. I've been playing the game on stream, so I've had to pace myself. If I wasn't, I'd be glued to my desk until I hit the credits. If you want to show your support for the people who had to leave Zaum, I'd say the best thing you can do is just that. Here's a list of companies they've gone on to and projects they're currently working on. I certainly plan on buying every game anyone remotely attached to Disco Elysium ever touches. If you still feel some kind of way about how it went down with Zaum, I think that's entirely reasonable. But hopefully now you at least have a better idea what sort of game this is. If you want to see more Zero Parades, check out the Live tab. I've been streaming the game, and VODs of past streams can always be found there. If you'd like to keep in the loop for future streams, you can subscribe and hit the bell icon, or head over to the Patreon and join as a free member. I usually drop a public post there when I'm about to stream.